Welcome to Next in Nonprofits. I'm Steve Boland, and I am very pleased to be joined today by Britt Stockert. She is a fundraising coach at DonorBox. Britt, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
Steve, hey, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
We got connected to talk about a very timely topic here, and we're recording this on February 26th, some important things. But before we dive into a little bit of a timely conversation, I'm wondering if you could just start us off by introducing your role at DonorBox. What's the work that you do there?
Yeah, so if you're a nonprofit listening, then you probably know of all of the CRMs out there, right? But I would say DonorBox, we don't just have donor a CRM or event ticketing or text to give. We pair education with it, where we're not just handing you a tool and say, good luck. And that's kind of where I come into play, Steve. I'm a fundraiser coach. And I basically teach. I'm a former 16-year nonprofiteer. I know fundraising strategies. I'm not just teaching on donor-centric fundraising, but community-centric fundraising. And I coach about 30 nonprofits on the strategy, but then we take it further. And okay, now we have a CRM, now we have donation forms, now we have automated drip campaigns. How do we get those strategies at play?
All kinds of ways to do that, and they get so customized by the mission and impact of different organizations. And there's so much we could talk about with just that. But one of those things that's changing right now, I think, is this idea of mutual aid or direct aid that is impacting so many people in 2026. And it's not that mutual aid or direct aid giving is new, but I do think that there's a different conversation happening with more formal nonprofit organizations. So let's start, if we could, with just a little definition or experience of what is direct aid. Can you tell me what that means to you and how you talk about kind of direct giving?
Yeah. And before I leap into some of my lived experience, because for most of my journey, I had no idea I was partaking in it. Mutual aid, Steve, the way I see it is it's very different than your standard charity model, right? There's something reciprocal. There's a level of reciprocity that's happening, true solidarity where it's two-way. And people think about mutual aid as it's something that just kind of cropped up after the pandemic, right? But if you look into the history, and I'm not going to give a history lesson, but mutual aid, it really stems back to BIPOC-led groups, indigenous giving economies. Think about labor unions, all of these smaller groups that were kind of non-institutionalized, they cropped up because institutions were not showing up and protecting them. And I think, just if I may, just share some of my experience.
Please.
What really kind of finally defined mutual aid for me was about 8 years ago. Here in Seattle, we have, I think now we're at the fourth largest homeless population, one of the most top unhoused families, counties in the United States. And as a parent, I have two children. I recognized there were families living in their cars right here off of 85th. And one of the biggest parts of my career when it came to mutual aid was leading a diaper bank.
Hmm.
Something, we all know about food banks, right? But diaper banks, diapers are not subsidized by WIC or SNAP. And long before we even got 501c3, we were a mutual aid group. We were, a parent living in their car or out in an encampment or wherever. They would call our intake line. A neighbor would pick up the line, and then we would meet the family within 24 to 72 hours. And I mean, we're going to places that Amazon couldn't even reach. Why I'm bringing this up is I can't tell you the number of times here I am. I have a paid nonprofit job. I've worked at many
Hmm.
nonprofits. I'm doing all the nonprofit things, navigating it, but there's kind of this invisible giving economy that many of us fundraisers and nonprofiteers are doing where, okay, I'm picking up my phone, my kid's school, there's a signal group happening. Many of our parents were moving $400 like in an hour to help a classmate from eviction. And this is what I'm talking about mutual aid. It's very, I wouldn't call it invisible, but it's non-institutionalized where
Right.
something very reciprocal is happening, right? Um, and this isn't unique to me. I'm still doing mutual aid every Tuesday night. I'm not going to give you the name of the group, but we're out in the community in Seattle. We are not just feeding our unhoused neighbors, but we're eating with them. Sometimes my son and I, we are going to a church safe park where families can set up shop for the night without fear of getting swept away or, by PD or whatnot. And we cook in community together, we eat together, and we converse. And so mutual aid, it's not one-sided, it's not one way. Again, it's a very reciprocal type of thing, if that makes sense.
Well, it's a very different experience from institutional charitable fundraising, where you might have a really well-meaning, great charity in the community that, does a food shelf or a soup kitchen or any number of good things. And people are used to the idea of, well, I give money or some goods to that organization, and this intermediary then provides the service or buys the diapers or does the whatever to help people in my community. I might get a tax write-off for that because that's a recognized charity, and there's a way to file a receipt and all the rest of it. There's a lot of good things about that, and I want to get into the kind of differences about those things, but especially in the last year and here I'm talking to you from the Twin Cities in Minnesota, where so much mutual aid giving has really taken off, beginning with a federal occupation that really started here more December of 25, where there just isn't time and response to set up formal processes and folks that are on the ground seeing people outside in the cold trying to do something about this, and they just go, well, they need hand warmers. I know where to get hand warmers. I'll go get some hand warmers and bring them down, or they may need a medic here, and I'm trained in that, so I'm going to go get some supplies, and I'm just going to come on site and try to help people with the supplies that I just purchased out of my own pocket. The speed with which that works is a really different thing from I give a gift to an organization, they go to a purchasing group, they buy a thing, they respond. Those are good and wonderful deals. But I'm wondering if, as you think about your work fundraising coaching with more traditional nonprofit organizations, how do they start thinking about their role in a community where mutual aid is becoming more of a space and a thing that's happening in meeting community needs?
Well, let's step back a little bit
Okay.
and talk about kind of a mindset shift because, and look, like I coach many nonprofits, I make a living. As a nonprofit coach, I've worked
Mhm.
most of my life in nonprofits. I think there's an opportunity to work together, but the way I see it, nonprofits are there to manage risk, right? Like they are operating, they're kind of beholden within some sort of framework. That they're bound to. It's all about operating within the mission. It's all about operating within a strategic vision. And because of that, they're there to protect the institution in a lot of ways, whereas mutual aid, they're built to protect the people. They're addressing an immediate need. And you're talking about speed, Steve.
Hmm.
And so when we're talking to your listeners out there, I would just encourage them to think about how your nonprofit works, okay? I worked at a direct service organization. Direct service organizations are known for kind of being deeply embedded in the community. But I will tell you, even at a direct service organization, we had layers of formalities.
Right.
Even, what we thought wasn't trauma-informed intake form, no, it was still a process. There were still loops to navigate. There were eligibility requirements. There were reporting requirements. And so if you're a nonprofit, one thing that I would offer up here is even if you're at a direct service organization, even if you don't work where someone's safety is at play, I would say think about kind of setting aside that policy or that process and kind of prioritizing the person involved because ultimately it really is about the people, right?
Yeah. It's why we're there, but I do think that sometimes, mission statements and, regulatory, things are elements that everybody has to deal with in a nonprofit organization. But I think that there's also a time in the past when we maybe set ourselves up as differently from mutual aid stuff in the charitable sector, where we would say, well, we report on a 990 how we spent all that money. We track all the receipts. We know exactly how that worked. If you give through this mutual aid, you hope it's helping people, but we have reports. And I feel like there was a time there, and I will certainly accept some responsibility for promoting this thinking. Like, well, if you're going to give, you should give to this organization that has all of these safeguards and checks about how the money is going to get used, which, as it turns out, is a pretty paternalistic way of thinking about things, but. It's something that I was part of for a while there. And now that we're looking at a very different mindset here, I think it's incumbent upon charities, institutions to start thinking, how is this mutual aid mentality shifting my relationship with donors? How do I think differently because they're thinking differently? As you coach people around that, how does that change kind of happen?
Yeah, I think you kind of alluded to it earlier where, traditional charity, we're taught that we are the experts, right? Like
Yes.
we gatekeep. There's a lot of gatekeeping, even as a case manager. Like we gatekeep who qualifies for our services, then we assess the need, then we make the decision. There are a lot of those carrot and stick type of conditions. And with mutual aid, I think the pandemic here in Washington, it's very reciprocal. I can't help but think in Washington with the vaccine rollout, it was a mess. It was a mess. The website, the COVID response website kept crashing. Seniors couldn't make appointments. They couldn't get to their appointments. The government here was navigating if masks worked or not. But meanwhile, what do you know? The mutual aid group right here on the hill where I lived, they weren't getting political. They didn't even know if this was evidence backed or not. They were there to advocate for their neighbors. And so that's kind of where you see neighbors helping each other. And that's what when we're talking to your nonprofit listeners, it's not just rethinking that mindset shift, but also thinking about the role of power dynamics in this.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about that because I do think that there's some of us that are trying to do better than we may have done in the past and trying to think about that. And that idea of, I have access to grants and, individual organizations may not, or individual people probably aren't eligible for some of that grant making type stuff. I have access to this infrastructure that allows me to think about, purchasing in bulk and saving money and there's a lot of things that are really good about that. But I think we've got this moment of going, this has to be kind of this yes and thing, not, you either give to our established organization with its process or you give on the street to somebody that you don't even know. And those two things never meet. I think there's a new space here where people are looking at that, and the charities need to start thinking of how do we support that messaging or be part of that messaging rather than trying to distance ourselves from that messaging. That's how it feels to me. I don't know if you're seeing that same challenge.
Yeah, you're nailing it on the head. This is not like an either or scenario, right? Um, and again, I think first off, there's three things I think nonprofits can really leverage as an opportunity to partner with mutual aid groups. We talked about speed, right? Again, even if you're not a direct service organization, you're still going to have some moments where you just got to take a risk. You got to trust your judgment and put that person that you're working with or serving as a priority. Set aside that process, set aside whatever approval process there is. There's that trust piece of it too. I think trust works so well in mutual aid is because at any given time, you're not just the person making a gift. There might be a moment where, hey, this week, as Brit, I'm giving $20 to my neighbor who needs gas money to get to work. Well, hey, 5 weeks later, that same person knows I just was hit with some medical bill. He's
Mm-hmm.
giving me $50. Mutual aid works because it's reciprocal. Trust grows because people have been in both of those roles, right? They're not just the giver, they're not just the beneficiary. They have been at any given time both of those roles. And because of that, they witness firsthand where that gift is going, how it applies, where it lands. So shared trust. And I think the third part of it that you're talking about, Steve, is power. I think
Yeah.
there is some beautiful thing about mutual aid too. And mutual aid groups, I will tell you, we're not over promising folks that we're going to solve homelessness in 2026, right? We're not, we approach whatever's in front of us and we're very authentic about it. And because things move so fast, right? There's speed. We are bound to make mistakes. And because both of us are invested, right? We're not just giving, but we're also receiving. We are more invested in when we make a mistake to be accountable. And so you see that accountability that doesn't always exist in those kind of, I think you said patriarchal or top down nonprofits because, there really is some sort of vulnerability and shared accountability happening.
Yeah, and even this idea of trust, I think, is so worth pursuing a little bit more because I think that charities might have tried to differentiate ourselves from other ways of doing sports. Like, you can trust us. We have a board of directors that oversees a budget, and there's this accountability process, and maybe we're even big enough to get an audit and outside people look at. You can trust that we're using your money for the thing that you intended it to be used for, and the sort of flip side of that used to be in the mutual aid, like, well, if you give money to somebody to pay their rent, you hope they're going to go pay rent with it, but maybe you don't know that. And that sort of intentional seeding of mistrust of, you should give it to us because we have reporting systems and this other thing doesn't, I think is going away, maybe, or being challenged more, maybe, or something. But it means that part of the conversation as institutional charities going to potential donors is no longer trying to, I think, put a wedge between mutual aid giving and charitable giving. I think that we're trying to say, how is what we're doing impacting the same mission values that you want to impact when you help somebody with their rent, or you give them gas money, or you help them repair a car, or whatever the other thing may be. Lining those things up may take a shift in thinking for some organizations. There may be some board members that are like, but we've always talked about, trust is because we're verifiable. Trust isn't something that comes from people knowing each other and just trusting. And I think there's a different thing happening now with what trust means.
I would say I don't have all the answers, Steve, but I would say the nonprofit, there needs to be some sort of release of letting go of control. This is really an opportunity.
Hmm.
Most mutual aid groups, I will tell you, they burn out. They burn people out. And why that is,
Yeah.
it's because, we're running on Venmo, we're using WhatsApp, we're doing this when our kids are sleeping on our lunch breaks, we're juggling our pay jobs, we're doing mutual aid, and this isn't always sustainable. And this is an opportunity for a nonprofit to kind of step in. And I'm not saying to kind of take over, right? But you talked about it. It's basically, you know, becoming a fiscal sponsor, maybe. And I'm not talking about being the decision maker, but simply being there to house the funds and cut the checks. That might be funding the mutual aid organizers out in their community doing the work, right? They're using all of their spare time. They're just do this powerful grassroots type of work and tools. I work at DonorBox. Most CRMs, most nonprofit fundraiser tools are only set up to benefit formal structures, nonprofits
Hmm.
with 501c3. Well, why not kind of lend out your nonprofit tool, your donation form, your CRM? And again, all of these things require for you to offer them up without a tit for tat type of thing, without branding it as some shiny new community initiative that you're hosting. You got to like step back and not center yourself, offer up these things and be a true partner where you're standing alongside them, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think that there's opportunities to establish some of that trust by participating in mutual aid support without that, required tit for tat kind of thing. One of my favorite examples recently here in the Twin Cities is a organization called Trilingual Cinema. In all the good times, they're just trying to build community by having people physically come together to watch and discuss movies and talk about how those films impact community lives. And some of them are very impactful documentaries, and some of them are just fun family films. And they just want families to come together and watch these things at the same time in the same place and build some connection. So there's their core mission, right? They need to raise money to support access to the films and all that stuff. But right now, they sponsored a movie night for the film Rogue One and the Star Wars thing, because the rebellion symbol has been kind of co-opted in the Twin Cities area with a loon, which is our state bird, and this symbol of this rebel loon is kind of everywhere here. And they're like, well, what's the simpatico mission moment for us? Like, well, we're going to do a mutual aid fundraiser for rent relief, but we're going to use this kind of rebellion symbol in a movie because that's what we do. We do movies and we talk about how people do this stuff. That's the connection where I think charity's got to be looking these days, is how is the alignment of your mission authentic with where the mutual aid work is happening. And I don't think it's necessarily like the Lincoln Center starts distributing sandwiches on the street, because that's not their mission and it's not what they do. But there are arts organizations that they could be supporting in ways that are very mutual aid friendly. There are ways for all of us, I think, as charities to start thinking, how are we building authentic relationships with people who want to give directly in this moment? That kind of thinking is a little bit of a shift. So I think as we talk about your coaching work with charities, how do you keep that authenticity part of the message at the front? Because I don't think we want to talk about usurping a message and trying to be opportunistic. It's like, oh, people are giving here, so now we'll jump into that space. It needs to be authentic to the community. I feel like that's how it's going to work.
Right. And I think it benefits the nonprofit because, counterintuitive to everything I'm seeing on LinkedIn, there's a lot of chatter about, hey, don't start another nonprofit.
Right.
That, and I get that. I really do get that. But there is such a scarcity mindset happening. And
Yeah.
in Washington, even in King County, there's no way one food bank can provide services to hundreds of thousands of families right now. And this is an opportunity for the nonprofit, again, like to really tap into people that are embedded in those communities. And again, like you're saying, Steve, step back, like none of this main character energy, right? But
Right.
stand
Yes.
alongside authenticity, showing up in your authentic selves as you're not taking credit, right? You're not rebranding this as your own initiative. Basically, just sharing those resources, sharing those tools, and at the same time, getting the word out there to your supporters through your email list, however it might be, that this partner out there in the community is helping you to do the work. Because ultimately, that's what supporters and donors want to see. They want to see that these massive problems are being addressed. They're getting tired, right? They're getting skeptical of their funds just not making a dent. So there really is some opportunity for those types of partnerships.
So, if an organization is just at the beginning of this shift in mindset, or like, okay, there's a lot happening here, we want to be open to this, how do they begin listening to what's happening if they haven't really been part of the Signal chat or the whatever the thing is? And they do feel like maybe they've spent the last however many years building more formal networks, and now they need to be able to listen to less formal ones. How do they begin?
Well, that's a great question because I will tell you, once we operate within those formal frameworks, we get tunnel vision, right? And we don't have access to those social networks that we should. I'm trying to think back about all of the ways I've been involved in mutual aid so much. I'm still involved in it. And I think, it starts through these really underground type of networks. I would say, if that makes sense. There's Facebook, there's TikTok, kind of outside of the normal channels. These things aren't going to happen at a Human Services Commission event
Right.
or community outreach event. You really gotta. A lot of it happens virtually, and then because there is some level of penalty and fear and consequences for being so visible. So yeah, a lot of it starts off socially on social media, virtually through these like smaller types of informal networks. And then you kind of get invited and you kind of become part of a bigger community. And so like that is a problem because it's very siloed and it's fragmented. And I do see that from mutual aid friends as well. They're not likely or apt to invite nonprofiteers to the table. Like, yes, many of us nonprofiteers and fundraisers, we are doing mutual aid work, but we have to proactively go out and seek it. If you're within like an informal mutual aid network, they're not going to go to the nonprofit and invite folks to the table because they know many nonprofiteers are still operating within some very harmful mindsets and systems. Like they haven't done some sort of work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience. And again, having walked this path directly, where in the past I might have said, well, don't just give money to an unregulated organization or a group of people. You should do it this way. Having learned that this is not a either or, and that there's lots of good things that happen that way, it does mean letting go of some power. I love how you characterize that as like no main character energy. I'm going to steal that phrase. That's a really good one in this conversation, I think. But you did mention that there are some tools that it might be helpful for nonprofit organizations to be able to bring payment processing outside of things like Venmo or Cash App or whatever other types of tools people may be using, and the ability to do more formal stuff. How do people begin making that offer that we want to be able to bring some assets to the table here, but we're not going to you have to trust us that we're not going to usurp that relationship. We're not going to, then take that contact information and, solicit that person 6 ways to Sunday or something.
Well, again, I think the responsibility to equalize the inverse type of power dynamic, the responsibility really needs to be on the nonprofits to proactively seek out those mutual aid groups. I know here in Seattle, you can easily find them. They're out there. They're doing the
Hmm.
work. They need help. They really do need help. So the word is getting out. So it's just a matter of nonprofits haven't, in my opinion, made that proactive outreach. And of course, like when you're wanting to lend some of your resources and assets, it's understanding that some of those systems and resources might be too formalized. And so you got to be okay with that. But even just extending that offer, right, is takes it to a whole level that has never been done. I know a neighbor here in the community. She's been running a food pantry for 3 years, and she reached a point where she was just done. She's
Yeah.
exhausted, and there's been so many neighbors. We live kind of in a mini city here. So many neighbors rely on that one food pantry, and it shut down. Like that was an opportunity. The nonprofits have been following this food pantry on the Be Neighborly page. The nonprofits know it's there, but the nonprofits didn't even extend an invite long before it shut down to be like, hey, how can we help you? Like, can we pay you a stipend? Can we serve as a fiscal sponsor where, you run the pantry, you make all the decisions, but we're simply just there to house the donations and then cut you the checks. But I'm not seeing any of that happening here. And I don't know. What are you seeing over there in Minneapolis, Steve?
Well, very much still, it's Venmo direct contributions from persons to persons, except, this
Hmm.
kind of thing where I'm seeing people pointing more towards direct giving opportunities that on their nonprofit pages. They're lifting them up. They may not be processing the donation directly and acting as that fiscal agent as much yet. But to your point, as these efforts continue on and people get very very tired, understandably there may be an opportunity for that. But I do see that there are more people who will have a community sponsored event, and instead of asking for people to make donations directly to the charity, they're like, well, here's this mutual aid effort, and it often is a GoFundMe or whatever, and that they never see the dollars. They don't get the contact information. They don't get any of that. And I think that that's an important shift in how charities can think about these things. Is they've got to be not thinking, because I personally have spent the last several decades of my career going, don't ever let somebody get away without your contact information. How are we going to reach you again? How are we going to talk to you more? How are we going to
Right.
help build a relationship? And this is that moment where that's got to be that urge has got to be kind of sublimated a little bit and moved out and say it's really got to be focused on how are we making it as easy as possible for people to do that mutual aid giving, and if they're already got a GoFundMe and we can just point at it, okay, and then stay in the conversation, stay in the game the next time there is going to be something like that. Maybe somebody says, what if we didn't use GoFundMe next time?
Hmm.
What if our local charity's got a donor box tool and we can just kind of build a campaign specifically around that? What assurances do we need about contact information and whatnot? Because if they are giving to a C3 charity, we are probably going to want to send them a contribution receipt. That
Right.
part I think really still plays. But we need to, in good faith, say, all right, we're going to, give them the receipts that they need or whatever other kind of support a donor may want. But we're not we're going to have to build some trust here that we are not going to try to interdict that relationship and have them like, now we want you to think about giving directly to us. Some people may do that. That is absolutely a potential outcome of good acting. People will see you have stepped up into community and they also want to give money to support your charity. And that's great. And I don't want to stop that relationship either, but it really needs to be kind of the secondary outcome and not the primary outcome. That's what I think I'm seeing more than people already setting up more formal fiscal sponsor relationships and all the rest of it, at least not here yet. But it does get me to a question as we're starting to run a little lowish on time about 2026, 2027. How does this start shifting thinking next? Because feel like we can know what's happening today, but I don't feel like I have a very good sense of how does that evolve in the coming 6 months, year, 2 years, to have responsive nonprofit organizations thinking of themselves differently in this landscape.
Right. Well, the future is the younger folks. I'm thinking about all the
Yeah.
younger folks. My friend has a teenage son, and he was telling me he gets emails from Amnesty International all the time, but rather than making a donation there, he sees a mutual aid post on his TikTok right there in his neighborhood, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna cash app her $50." The future is the youth, and there's something about the younger generations where I hate to paint a broad stroke, but in a way, they have let go. They have released
Hmm.
a sense of control that you won't
Yeah.
find with any of the older types of donors. I don't know why that is, but nonprofits, we need to look to the future. We need to look to the younger folks. They are giving to direct aid. We're starting to see them do more of that, right? Um, Funders, if you're a funder, I know here in Seattle, there are a couple of community foundations where they're trying something out for the first time where they're no longer having a board of trustees, right? Call the shots in terms of what type of nonprofits or mutual aid groups get funding. They're inviting local neighbors to sit on very informal focus groups, panels, and making those decisions where the money goes. So funders are starting to shift. But they're, like you said, how do we get to this? There's a mindset shift. And I think that's going to be the biggest obstacle. I don't know. I don't know, Steve. Like, how
Yeah.
do we change that? To be honest, it in a way, it is a sense of letting go, of releasing that control.
And some of it may, you mentioned earlier this scarcity mindset problem versus an abundance mindset problem. And that's been a conversation in the community-centric fundraising world too, as opposed to the donor-centric conversations. And you mentioned community-centric fundraising at the beginning of our conversation. But I think that there's an opportunity here for people to shift, what that may look like in the future. And we may need to be thinking a lot more of how are we showing up in communities in ways that people feel uh, motivated to learn more about the charity and perhaps participate in the charity rather than I went to your website and the very first thing that happened was a pop-over screen that wants me to give contact information before I move on to learn anything else. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, sign up for our newsletter. We got to have you. I'm like, well, maybe we're not centering that. Maybe the first thing in this shift is we're not centering, please give me your contact information. As much as I would love to have your contact information, maybe that's our first 2026 move forward is, let's get people to the information about impact and community that they need. And then trust the process that if they find value in what you're doing to support charities, they'll make a gift there too. They'll come back to you, but we're going to have to
Mhm.
release a little of that control you were talking about. I think that might be the thing that starts us in the right direction.
Right. It's like any relationship, right? We're not going to make an ask off the get-go. You need to kind of invest in that relationship. And I think the power of this, I would call it kind of a decentralized network, is you got nonprofits working in partnership with mutual aid groups, right? You have a level of community-led decision making happening. Why not bring those stories to life from the get-go as opposed to starting from a place of I need your email, I need your email so we can steward the relationship and make the next ask. No, like with these decentralized networks happening, right? We're getting away kind of one giant org model. We know funders are funding more nimble, smaller nonprofits, and they want to see those partnerships. Use that as a space to kind of gather those stories and kind of elevate them across your channels, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I do think it does. So, you're a coach for nonprofit organizations. So we'll talk a little bit about fundraising and whatnot. How do people get coaches? What if I'm interested in that? How does that happen?
Yeah, well, most people don't think they need a coach. And and I always tell I will tell you the 40 different nonprofits I coach, they are so different. You got your small shop, one person ED also doing development director work. You got a large nonprofit like C-SPAN. C-SPAN, they are experts in fundraising, right? They have a whole development team, but why they're coming to me is a lot of these pervasive problems still exist in the nonprofit sector, and many development directors, many executive directors, they don't always feel like they're in a safe place, like they have psychological safety to co-collaborate and to co-create. So it's not just about teaching on fundraising strategy, and it's not just teaching them on how do you implement those strategies with your tech tools, but in many ways, I am there. I'm no expert as their coach. We are learning together. It's a safe place to just kind of do the things that they need to do, right? Without fearing that there's going to be some level of harm involved. So yeah, coaching is really busy.
How do people get connected though with a coach? How does that happen?
Yeah, well, in terms of donor box, for coaching to really work, obviously we really want to see you using our tools, our donation forms, our CRM. I can coach on theory, right? But at some point we can meet so many times and then we run up against a wall where we can't do the thing it is that we've been learning. And so if you're interested in coaching, I will, Steve, I'll share with you our premium webpage that you can drop in the show notes, but they
Cool.
can book a discovery call with me.
Okay.
And any nonprofit, any budget size, I would just say that anyone who's looking for coaching needs to have an open mindset that they're willing to invest at least 5 to 10 hours into fundraising, right? Because it's not just one thing to teach and learn. You actually have to do the work.
Even if you don't have a coach, I would say that's it. And that's part of this building relationships and community thing that we're talking about with creating some trust here is you've got to just spend the time to listen to where people are coming from. I mean, I think it's great to think, oh yeah, there's a mutual aid organization. I'll do a fundraiser for them, and then I'll be able to live off that glow for a little while or whatever. I think it's really important to be able to think authentically about how you can be in that space. And if you're just not used to spending time in those kinds of things, then a coach can help you break into that mentality and start thinking about it. But it's going to take time. This isn't something that happens just very quickly in many circumstances. So it's good to realize that. I will share quickly the very first time I ever worked with a coach back in the 20th century, long time ago now. Uh, she told me that people ask, "Well, what do I need a coach for?" And she would respond to people. It's like, "Have you heard of Michael Jordan?" So, well, yeah, of course, like one of the greatest players ever. Yeah, of course. He has a coach.
Yeah,
Somebody has
he.
to somebody has to give him feedback on how he's
Mhm.
doing, even though he's pretty much the best in the game, right? There's a coach that can't
Mhm.
do half the things he can do. but it's that accountability connection with somebody that can be outside of your head. And that's the same thing across all sorts of areas where, it's maybe not athleticism or this or the other thing, but it is getting somebody that's outside your space to look at you from that side and go, have you thought about this? Have you considered that? All of those things that can be useful. So I do think it's great as we get into this that you may need kind of an accountability coach within the aid networks to help you stay humble, stay connected to this. Don't get that main characterism thing. And a lot of us have spent our whole careers going, my nonprofit is the best thing that has ever graced the
Hmm.
earth. I love the work that we do. We are so wonderful. And that's great to feel, but I think that you've got to come to these conversations from a position of learning. Why are people feeling like the mutual aid networks are where they're investing their time now, and don't go, but my nonprofit is the best thing ever. I'm like, it could be great. Let's approach this with the earnestness of a humble person willing to learn.
You called it out. I think this is the whole conversation. It's really that shift in your mindset. And I've heard work as a mutual aid organizer, someone working in a small nonprofit. Well, mutual aid groups, they're not quite there yet. They still need to grow, and there really is some level of talking down to them. And
Yeah.
I just encourage all of us humility, right? Even in coaching, I'm still learning. I'm no expert. And that's what we got to bring to 2026 is really, if we want to address a lot of these problems, we need to come with that earnesty that you're talking about, Steve.
Yes, we do. Good work for all of us to do and so much to learn from. And I'm afraid we are pretty much out of time. So I just want to thank you so much for making yourself available to share these thoughts with a big group of people today. So Brittan Stockert is a coach at DonorBox. More information in the show notes about all that. Britt, thanks again for your time.
Hey, thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate the company today.